So we take everyone through a development process, which is pretty stringent. And it's going to start with like, what are your goals? Then how are you going to measure those goals? And trying to get people away from vanity metrics like listener numbers. And you build a whole bunch of other metrics. And then inevitably, they forget everything that you ever discussed and just want to see more listeners. How do you do it? A whole bunch of tactics, but it's about building a brand around it. It's about building an experience. It's about bringing it to life. So it's about the live. It's about, I mean, we're going off wildly on a tangent here, but it's about all the things you need to do to build a brand so that even when you're not publishing content, the listener or the community can probably still engage with you somehow.
Welcome to the Cashflow Fight Club podcast. I'm Mike Deaton.
And I'm Ligia Deaton. Together as co-hosts in life, business, and this podcast, we're matching up the heavyweights of cash flow creation to see who reigns supreme.
We do this so you can discover the best way for you to generate transformational cash flow and pursue the life of your dreams. So whether you're a side hustle seeker, full-time entrepreneur, or just looking to create job-quitting cash flow like we did, hit subscribe and grab your ringside seat for the most entertaining and informative investing show on the airwaves. Let's get in the arena.
Let's do it. Today, a podcast about podcasting. We have a really fun matchup with two podcast producers and coaches. They focus on one platform and bring two different approaches. Let's introduce our guests.
Fighting out of London, England, our first guest adheres to a philosophy of go big or go home. Glossy, curated, and polished productions created to reach large audiences, pull in big revenue dollars, and avoid the dreaded podcast graveyard. He's compiled over 15 years of experience creating and producing events that garner consumer attention. He's the founder of One Fine Play, a podcast strategy and production company, host of his own podcast, The Podcast Graveyard, a leading voice about podcasting, as well as a 3-time Ironman finisher. Please welcome to the arena, James the Grave Digger Bishop.
Woohoo!
And fighting out of New Jersey, USA, our next guest has climbed his way through various content creation and marketing roles and now leverages his skills and experience to help founders and CEOs launch profitable podcasts by leading with strategy instead of the typical production focus. He's the host of his own podcast, The Ryan Sullivan Show, and founder and coach at his company, Podcast Principles. Please welcome to the arena, Ryan, the punch drunk podcaster, Sullivan.
Yes, this is a great episode packed with plenty of strong opinions about what makes a good podcast great and what it takes to produce a profitable show.
So let's get ready to rumble in the Cashflow Fight Club arena. Ryan and James, welcome to the Cashflow Fight Club podcast. We're looking forward to a fun and just a fun and exciting matchup today. So
Yes.
Appreciate you coming on.
Welcome, guys.
Thank you. You too. Appreciate it. James, I had James in mind for this. So we're on the other side of the pond too. So
Yeah, it was a personal request. So you were called out, James. I like it. So bring
Awesome.
the heat. Bring
Thank
the
you.
heat. So why don't we just lead off with a little introduction, background about yourselves and where you focus today. James, why don't we start with you? Give us the rundown.
Absolutely. Well, first off, thanks for having me. And I appreciate being called out by Ryan to come on the show. I guess I'm known for being opinionated and direct and passionate about these kinds of things. So I guess it makes sense. I have been self-employed since I was 24. I'm 40 now. I built a business in the event space, which I scaled and sold when I was 30. And that was really about understanding human behavior in real life. I then went on and worked in television for a couple of years and realized that wasn't for me for lots of reasons over here. I'm also representing for the UK on this matchup. I was going to say Europe, but we're not part of Europe, so I'll have to just go UK. And the traditional television model was definitely struggling when I was working in television, and it has only declined since. So I moved into making content on the internet, primarily podcasting. And I now run a creative content company, and our legacy sort of work, I guess, is in the podcasting space.
Mm-hmm. Audio and video, or primarily audio?
So I employ a bunch of people who nearly all come from filmmaking. So everything we do is video and audio.
Yeah, that's what I was picking up in the thread of your through line there. So
that's not actually true. Our biggest shows are audio only, but we can get onto that later.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. Right on. All right. Across the pond to you, Ryan.
Yeah, you got it. So to counter what James said, I became self-employed at 21. So, just letting you know. Come on, man. So what happened was I worked for a startup marketing company. I had my own podcast, so I just thought, well, I can edit podcasts, which I wasn't good at, but I just thought since I was doing it that I could do it for companies. And I did it for a company. After 19 episodes, they took me off the podcast. They said it wasn't working. I thought that was their problem, not my problem. And I thought the podcast didn't have a problem. They just didn't see it through. So after that, I left the company. And in March, I started this company, March 2020, I mean. So now we're 4 years in, 6 years into podcasting, 4 years into helping companies launch, build, grow their podcasts. So it's just been crazy ride. Yeah, I was in entertainment too. I also have an entertainment company, excuse me, that I do on the side. And I'm a rapper, DJ and stuff, but that's more just, my passions. But yeah, the day-to-day is helping people get their podcasts, in this case, or in most cases now, profitable, or at least working with alongside their business.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Any rap experience, James?
I'm limited on the rap experience, I'll be honest.
Yeah. Okay. I was thinking we could do maybe a rap battle as well, but we'll save that for a different show.
Sadly, I can't offer that. This is the point where I wish I had some like Harry Max level skills.
Oh my God.
To drop,
he's amazing.
Okay, we're going down a rabbit hole here.
Google him.
All right, James. So background in events, productions, more, I guess, larger scale production events. And Ryan, it sounds a little more boutique type of things. How do you guys see the contrast between the two?
James?
So I think there are some differences. I don't know this for definite, but I employ a team of people. I have a bunch of full-time overheads, and I guess the more boutique shows that Ryan works on, just really simply for me, they're not commercially viable at all. So we are forced into working on a different type of show. We actually recently, a couple of months ago, I did a bit of analysis, and I realized that every time I was winning £10,000 worth of work, it was costing me £10,000 in our smaller shows. So I wasn't literally spending it, but I was over-servicing to the extent of an addition, like basically double what I was charging. But the market won't pay what it was costing us. So we, even in the last few months, we've had to tighten up again and push our business to a model where things are just more highly produced, I suppose, because that's the only way that we can make it commercially viable. Whereas I think Ryan's model is slightly different.
Yeah, James, is that what you're seeing? I guess in general, like audiences appreciate more of a polish in terms of the in production and post production that or maybe not even just the audience, but I guess the audience leads into sponsorship and monetization and being able to support a podcast. Is that kind of your platform?
So I guess one thing that Ryan and I probably have in common based on what he said is that as a producer of a business I'd like to be profitable, our responsibility is therefore to have a set of commercials around a podcast, which means we're treating it like a business. It's not just a passion project. It's not for fun. If you're making something for someone else, they automatically assume a whole set of results that they suddenly want because they've paid money for it. And, that adds a whole load of challenges for us. So, yeah, we have to work on the commercials. We have to deliver results, which essentially, to your point, means an audience of people that are engaged and listening, and they want to see growth. They want to see all these kinds of return on, whatever metrics. So yeah, I'm under pressure to deliver that stuff. And the only way to do that is to bring more to each of the shows. And that inevitably costs money and means you need a business that, a business model.
What does commercially viable mean?
To me?
Yes.
It's a great question.
Because I don't use that term ever, so I don't know what that even means.
Okay, so it means
you can get sponsors.
Well, it needs to be. They need to be
cash flowing positive, so you're bringing in more than you're spending.
Yeah, I guess that's a simple definition of commercially viable.
Okay.
From a podcast perspective, they need to be seeing some kind of return.
Okay, so would that count as you have a podcast? That podcast, people listen to it, then become interested in the hosts, then they book the call with the host, then they become clients of the host. Is that commercially viable?
Yeah.
Okay, so my podcasts are commercially viable.
Yeah, your podcasts are commercially viable.
Okay.
But getting the host to believe that that's what's going to happen to their show, different problem. Understanding where commercials are and what they look like, very different. I've actually just been in London at a trade show called the Podcast Show. Happens in central London once a year. It's been the last 2 days. There's no work at that show for us. It's all advertisers, sponsors, brands. It's people like Rode and Shaw and BBC and Spotify. I took the whole team there for 2 days. We did no work. But for me, it's a really good commercially viable proposition because I know that the halo effect of being seen there will pay me out in the long run. I just have to believe it. But to me, that's a commercially viable proposition.
Yeah. And in that case, being on LinkedIn is commercially viable because I'm going to get X amount of impressions, right? Like James is going to be at that show. He's going to meet people that I'm not going to meet. I'm not there. I'm out on LinkedIn getting hundreds of thousands, millions of impressions, thousands of followers. I'm going to connect with people that aren't going to reach his content. So and that's just the marketing side of our own companies. I know we're not talking about podcasts this second. But yeah, I'd like to that's why I asked that question because yes, commercially viable is different for everybody, but yeah, it is a belief system. You do have to believe that organic content is going to work. And no matter what. But yeah, I don't focus on the production side. I mean, I'll say this. I'm not as passionate about it personally. So yes, I do have a team of people that do it. But at the end of the day, yes, we create boutique niche podcasts where the general public is never going to listen to it. And that wasn't the point of it. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, James, but I think yours have maybe more, if you're going to invest all that money in production, they have to have more mass appeal, right?
Yeah, so let's talk real numbers because I don't like talking in generalisms.
Thank you. Yeah.
Is that all right? Is that fair?
Yes, please. No, it's preferred.
Okay, so, and in fact, I'll come on in a minute to how we're changing the model and how our company is evolving based on your question earlier around podcasting right now and how audiences want to consume content. Our average podcast episode, I'll try and convert this into dollars, 2 seconds, because this is going to be a boring conversation otherwise. Okay, so actually, interestingly, pre-COVID, when I first met Ryan, our average podcast episode, we were charging about $8,500, give or take, right? For one podcast episode to a customer. Then the whole COVID thing happened and we dropped to probably somewhere around $1,200. And that was good, but that was horrendous, but huge drop. It's completely rebuild the business.
And is that because the logistics changed? You weren't going physically all on set and things were happening remotely, or is it just a factor of supply and demand?
Both of those things. So it was affected by three things. It was supply and demand. Suddenly there was anyone and everyone thought they could make a podcast because it came to trend. Partly, there was less production value because we weren't going to studios on shoots, whatever. And then thirdly, because of the supply, the demand for a really high quality audio only narrative show that maybe took a team of 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 people to make, that demand wasn't there. They weren't commissioning those shows and it just plummeted through the floor. if you look at a show like, have you ever listened to Serial, the podcast?
I'm aware of it. I haven't listened.
38 people worked on that show.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO, which is a big show in the UK, he's got a team of like 25 people work on that show. So they're not making shows. Their amortized cost per episode can't be $1,500. Now we're back to our average episode cost is climbing, and we're back to it being $3,500 to $4,000 an episode. So we're delivering in accordance with that. So we make a show right now that is $2,500 an episode, and it's doing 10,000 listens an episode. And every week the client's like, it needs to be growing 20% week on week. Like, you need to be growing this thing. I can't keep these plowed upwards of $100,000 into the first season, and he needs to see results. So that's, I've got to make it commercially viable.
Dude, you have the harder job. There's no doubt.
And what type of client comes to you for services, James? Is it typically someone that already has an audience or some kind of a base, like Diary of a CEO or whatever, and they know that most likely they're going to have an audience for their podcast when they get going? Or is it somebody that ramps up from maybe obscurity?
So we're about 50% founders and founders of businesses. We're about 15% branded content, which internally we hate. And then the rest is what we refer to as talent. So either some form of celebrity, but in this day and age, they're more like a YouTuber or someone with
personal brand or something.
Social audience, but a significant social audience, right?
I would imagine.
So like that show is hosted by two journalists, two newspaper journalists in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And they are talking on a topic thereabout. So, they already have a combined audience of maybe 150,000 when they started.
Right.
You're building on that.
Got it.
But someone's come along. They've got a producer, a manager, an agent, whatever you want to call them, and that person is trying to turn that into a business.
Yeah, makes sense.
I'm curious.
And as a just for complete transparency, I burn $20K a month running the agency. I don't burn my overhead. I don't burn it. My overhead.
Yeah.
Makes sense. My expenses, non-people.
That's £20,000. So that's $25,000.
Sorry, we can figure it out.
That's $25,000. Yeah.
Post production. I'm going to dub your accent over with an American voice as well. So
Cool.
AI, man, it got there.
Yeah. No worries.
You had a question.
Yes, James, I'm curious, what do you see are the best factors of growth? How do you drive growth?
Ask a more specific question.
I told you he was going to be good.
You mentioned 20% growth.
So
Yeah, let's do
your
that.
clients want to see a 20% growth, or you want to see that. How do you drive that growth?
And I'm assuming that's listener growth, like they want downloads.
Yeah, that's like what you do is at the very beginning, you work really hard with them to identify. So we take everyone through a development process, which is pretty stringent, and it's going to start with like, what are your goals? Then how are you going to measure those goals, and trying to get people away from vanity metrics like listener numbers, and you build a whole bunch of other metrics. And then inevitably, they forget everything that you ever discussed and just want to see more listeners. So
always.
How do you do it? A whole bunch of tactics, but it's about building a brand around it. It's about building an experience. It's about bringing it to life. So it's about the live. It's about, we're going off wildly on a tangent here, but it's about all the things you need to do to build a brand. So that even when you're not publishing content, the listener or the community can probably still engage with you somehow. And I'm not talking about some shitty TikToks. I'm talking about like something of actual value to them that means that they can still be interacting with you, or you can be front of mind when you're not publishing, because you're only posting 1 hour's worth of stuff a week. So what are they going to do in the other 167 to not forget you? So whether that's a live event or it's merchandise or it's digital products or it's other content or it's a second episode a week or whatever it might be, it's that kind of stuff.
Yeah, maybe let's put a pin in that, and we'll pivot over to Ryan and kind of get your side of where James has been in terms of show formats and sizes and cost structures and things like that. And then if we get into another topic about driving podcast growth, we can compare and contrast as well.
Yeah, sounds good. So, I mean, I think that James's side is, in a sense, podcasts as a business, where like the podcast has to drive revenue. I get to skip all that. What I mean is there's a company, right? Let's say like a B2B company, 7-8 figures, right? They have a social media manager, and that manager is posting a quote of the CEO on their company page that gets 4 likes. Nobody cares about that. Nobody reads that. Nobody even acknowledges it. Instead, you're paying this person $80K a year, by the way, to like basically post like things that don't work, right? And this is pretty universal, right? It's not even really exaggerating. Instead, hey, maybe let's look at this, the other side of the equation. Maybe we have a CMO or somebody in this company, right, who believes that if I just talk on a video on LinkedIn, that may drive more talent and more clients and more prospects. That may make it easier for people to just know about us, right? And then the rest of the funnel we already have built out. So that's kind of the philosophy that I work around. So it is podcasts as a marketing expense and an investment, because it's not a depreciating asset. It's actually an appreciating asset if you create evergreen content. So you're transitioning from marketing that literally just doesn't work to a philosophy that involves creating, or basically I'll say this in a simple way. You just you create a podcast that allows people to consume you, not the company, like a actual person within the company, right? And so that's brand, that's culture, right? I mean, I spoke to a gentleman who owns 10 dental offices yesterday. He got a new dentist to like in his program from him being a guest on a podcast. Like they were attracted to him, so then they went ahead and became a guest on his podcast. So yeah, I think it's more like in the company or the B2B context. For me, I don't have to worry about that we're not trying to blow this podcast up. Like we're not trying to go from 10,000 downloads a month to 15,000. It's more so about the content, the post-produced content that they end up having at the end of the line. The people who listen to it on a week-to-week basis, sure, those are the people that are lower in the funnel. But again, the podcast, it also doesn't cost as much as if you're going to do something that James does.
So interestingly, can I go? My go?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going. So interestingly, we've actually, despite all those things that I've said, we've had a really tough time. It's been difficult for lots of reasons. And it is difficult because you have all of those pressures and people quit and all kinds of different things happen, and the general lack of stability. So it's been tough. So we've actually moved to a slightly different business model now, which I mentioned earlier, which is exactly what Ryan does, but just scaled up a bit. So whilst we still have this legacy in podcasting, and as I said earlier, I have a team of people. So internally, I employ a developer, a designer, videographers, producers, audio engineer, blah, whatever. So we can make all kinds of different content. It doesn't really make any difference to us. They just love telling stories. We realized that if we went into businesses or we spoke to these people and offered them the opportunity to have a fractional head of content around themselves or their business or their brand or whatever it would be, fractional meaning part-time, so that person's doing that role for a number of different people. And we helped them build a plan, and then we implemented that plan and we improved that plan. And we said, we want you to commit to us for 6 months. And our aim at the end of that 6 months is to not be in your business anymore, which is an idea that I borrowed from Alex Hormozy and have turned a little bit to work this way. He did something slightly different, but that's where I got the idea from. People love it because one of the things that we realized is what they want is content, and they don't really know how they're going to do it. And so they think, a podcast will be easy and cheap. So let's say we want a podcast, and then really that's not what they want. And they don't really have any passion for that podcast. And it's just inevitably going to end up dying. And Ryan's using a podcast as a mechanism to get people to record content that he can then chop up and do stuff in other places. But we were like, the thing is, and this is just my opinion, but I think we've entered an era where clips from your podcast on social platforms are just, the people have blindness to them at this point. Like there are so many, everyone's done it. Everyone knows what you're doing, to the extent that people now fake it. Like they sit there and they're not even having a podcast. They're just having one end side of a conversation to record clip stuff they can make for clips. But you now need to make content that's contextual to the platform. So you need to make TikToks relevant for TikTok, and you need to make, LinkedIn content for LinkedIn, and so on and so on and so on. But these people don't know how to go about this. So we're like, look, we'll take this on for you as a fractional head of content. And actually, since we've been doing that, which is maybe like 3 months now, everything is just climbing.
And what's the benefit of that approach? Is it just because you come at it from a more intentional viewpoint in mapping out and strategizing the content, and then, as you just mentioned, customizing it or tailoring it per platform?
Because let's give you a simple example. It's because people don't know how, or don't want to, or need support in the execution. For example,
we struggle with this honestly, right, in our business. So, podcast aside, it's like, okay, we know we would benefit from producing content, but then it's about, okay, what should the topic be, or how to go about recording and slicing and doing all that.
Yeah, so we've got a framework that we've tested over 5 or 6 years that means you can scale content for your business. So we help you to plan that and then to implement it. And a good example would be, for you, and I don't want to make it personal, but you've got no script for this podcast. There's no brief. There's no, it's not how I would make a podcast, right? So I could give you a piece of advice, which is I would write a script so everyone knows the direction. And then the listeners will know the beginning, the middle, and end. They'll become familiar with that, right? Currently, you're going to have to fight Ryan and me for time on the show. But the next episode, the only person out of the three of us that's turning up is you. So it's actually you that the listener wants to hear from, right? You're currently a question asker. You shouldn't be a question asker. You should be the main character of this. And if you had a script, we would have to stick to that tighter. Great piece of advice. But now when we hang up off the call, you've got a problem. And in the model that we're working as a fractional head of content, like, look, we're going to fix it for you too. Because to me, I can do that in 10 minutes. Not in 10 minutes, is maybe, but I know how to do it. I've done it lots of times.
Right.
Well, I haven't. I have
you have a team, and they have a formula, they have a process, they understand. Yeah.
So essentially, that's what we noticed was happening, and what people would say to us is we've been given advice by, whether it's a consultant that's written us a strategy, but we don't know what to do, or a freelancer who's a bit wild, or we've employed our 19-year-old niece because we think that she's great at making TikToks, apparently, but that's how we underpin our sales strategy. And we're a bit lost now. Can you help? And we heard that so many times. We were like, well, there's a way of fixing that. And Ryan knows that I've stolen that from Gary Vaynerchuk. I've just realized.
Hey, we've all stolen all of it from
Hermosi. He stole it from someone else.
Well, it's interesting though. It's interesting though how similar this story is. It's interesting how similar our story is, right? James, you have him going from like these insane, massive productions with like celebrities involved sometimes, and like tens of thousands of downloads. I was on the opposite side of the spectrum: indie creators, solopreneurs, a lot of LinkedIn influencer types, right? And then we both landed at this middle ground of like, hey, wait, there's a massive problem in business. And even the marketing people don't know how to create the content strategy that's actually sustainable, right? So yeah, it is really, it's really cool to see us kind of like essentially land in a similar spot. And I do agree with you. It's so much harder to make a podcast clip into a TikTok than it is to just make a TikTok, right? I get that. Now, what we do is we focus on only 2 platforms, LinkedIn and YouTube. I'm not going to consult on any other platforms because I couldn't tell you what to do. But on LinkedIn, that's why we create podcasts with companies who want to create organic content for LinkedIn and have that content reach a certain person or achieve a certain goal. The way to do that is to plan the podcast all the way from the beginning there's not a problem with podcast clips with there being too many clips. If you go on LinkedIn, you're not going to see that many of them. Go through 40, 50 posts and tell me how many are podcast clips. Not that many. The problem is B2B companies create podcast interview shows with people nobody cares about and nobody knows. Then they post a clip of that and nobody cares about it because they didn't plan and they didn't create a strategy. But if you create the strategy with the end in mind, that's why my podcast clips do so well on LinkedIn. You don't have to take anybody's word for it. You can just go to my page. It's all podcast clips and they all get more engagement than a lot of other people. So it's not about the clips or the problem is people create podcasts that people don't want to watch because they never created a strategy to begin with. So I think me and James both agree on that point. But the thing is, yes, the clips can work. But the people who I know who have podcast clips that blow up on TikTok spend 20 to 30 hours each clip editing them, right? Now, would you rather just make a TikTok? Yeah, probably, right? So anything can work. The podcast can do anything. It just can't do 5 things. So you just got to choose the one thing you want it to do the most. If it's the 10,000 downloads, 20,000 downloads a month, great. But then we also can't try to sell 7 services on the back end of it, right? Or is it lead generation? Well, maybe we shouldn't interview random people, right? Maybe we should talk about our company philosophy and our case studies.
It's interesting. At the podcast show, someone said this thing, which is a really good way of explaining your podcast growth question, which is, okay, so either you're going after people who know about your specialism. So let's say you make Harry Potter, he'll do. So there are people who know about Harry Potter, but they don't know about podcasting. That's one audience that you can go after, because they know about your specialism, but they don't know about podcasting. Or the other option is people know about podcasting, but they don't know about your specialism yet. So you've got to find, they don't know about your podcast, right? In your specialism. Those are the only 2 groups of people you're interested in. If they're interested in Star Wars, but not Harry Potter, irrelevant to you. So you just got to work out where those people are.
And then if there's imagine there's 10, which there's more Harry Potter podcasts. It's like, hey, I'm going to make a Harry Potter podcast. It's like, yeah, but how many Harry Potter podcasts are Harry Potter fans listening to in a given week, right? Like there's just the reality of saturation. Like when people say like podcasts are saturated, like yes and no, because there's only a few million of them, but they are saturated depending on the industry. So I'm going to say that like, yeah, Star Trek, Harry Potter, Star Wars podcasts is what hasn't been done, right? They've already interviewed the people who have made the movies. They've already had the cult following, but so that's what you got to look at though. It's like, yes, not everything is going to work in that case, even in that case, right? Like sometimes you create a podcast, same thing as every starving artist, every single singer, who's good, who's not famous. That's most podcasts. Something happened. Something didn't click. Another singer from their city got the clout first and was a little bit better. Like that's reality. That's just reality. Not everything's going to work,
Why, out of interest, do you only go LinkedIn and YouTube?
Yeah. So I don't want to give advice on things that I don't know. And for some reason, I'll say the reason. I used to be on Upwork trying to get jobs. LinkedIn, I got a job my first day of using LinkedIn. I got a gig. So yeah, crazy, man. Like literally DM'd a guy. This is luck, obviously luck, timing, all that type of stuff. But it was a pro soccer player. Ended up getting $20 an episode, James. I was editing audio for $20 an episode. Yep.
I remember speaking to you in those days and finding it stressful.
Yeah, man. So, so I figured out LinkedIn. That's why I use it. And I know how to teach people how to use it. YouTube, number 2, I've been on and off YouTube for 12 years. Like, not as much of an expert there, more so than the average person for sure. But yeah, it's just because I know how to use it and I know how to make the content work.
Yeah, it's specialization. And I appreciate that because it's if you try to go across, the Gary Vaynerchuk method where you're on all platforms producing all content, I'm not sure that's maybe for him and his crew that's possible.
Wait, what happened? What just came out of your mouth was an excuse. I hard disagree with that. I hard disagree with that.
Okay, well, I was about to caveat it. I think if you have the size of his production crew, for me personally, to produce content on all those platforms successfully, I don't know that that's possible for me to understand the nuances between TikTok and LinkedIn and YouTube.
I agree.
And Instagram.
I agree with posting all. I just say do it one at a time. I start with LinkedIn. I dominate that. I understand how to use it. I could start to outsource some stuff. Then I go to YouTube. I get my subscribers there. I get my leads there. Okay, great. Now we can outsource a little bit of that, then move to the next one. That's just how I do it. The ultimate goal is all.
I do it differently, or I would explain and see it differently. Two things. The first is that I definitely split sales from brand building, and this is a thing that we see a lot. Ryan, I know because I watch him carefully. Like, Ryan and I are quite similar, right? We've known each other for a long time. There's a big elephant in the room here. One is, like, we both know YouTube is where it's at. We were both bigger fans of YouTube than podcasting, personally. We both have really strong character development. So I post much less frequently than Ryan does on LinkedIn, like maybe once a week and intermittently, like anyone who saw, I don't have a strategy. My strategy is just if I've got something to say. But at this show the last 2 days, probably 50 people came up to me and said, hey, I know you from LinkedIn. Because I go in there and I have a straight, clear character. I finish every little, even tiny things. Like I finish every post with, it just says, okay, bye, at the end of every post. And people notice. And I now get emails from people, and at the end they write, okay, bye. Like, this character development really works. I say, yep. I just write what I think, what I believe, even if it's not necessarily popular. And so that character, and Ryan has the same. Like, if you follow him on his socials, he's sharing these stories and he's building a strong character. But a lot of what he's talking about in terms of helping clients, this stuff, it's just right hooks all the time. It's like punching for the sell the whole time, which is slightly different from what his success. And I don't know your full strategy, but you've definitely got to split sales from brand, right? And Gary Vaynerchuk talks about that in the jab, 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 right hook methodology. Jabbing is the brand building, right hooks is the sale. And that's becoming ever presently more important. Then the second thing, when we're building a plan with anybody that wants to achieve something, is to say, okay, what are you actually trying to achieve here is an important thing. Then who are your audiences and how are you segmenting those audiences? And then where are those audiences hanging out? Like, what do you know about those people? Where do they hang out? What do they do? Like, what books are they reading? What magazines are they reading? What apps have they got on their phone? What podcasts they listen to? What TV shows? Like, what do they subscribe to? But all this kind of stuff about their life. And then what you really want to worry about is where the answer to that question is. Because if they like to sit in their like motorhome and read I don't have any American versions of this, but in the UK, like Saga magazine or like Motorhome magazine, because, you know, they're 70. Don't post on TikTok, bro, because they're not there, right? And so on. And so I become platform agnostic. Yes, for lots of people in the, you know, probably client base that we're working in, LinkedIn is a great answer. But the actual answer for me is, where do they hang out and where do they consume more importantly, where do they consume your kind of content? Perfect example of this being, I really like long distance triathlon, but I only read that stuff. I don't consume any podcasts and I don't really watch any videos. I just read it because that's how I consume that news. So, right, if I want politics, this is now just an example. If I want politics, I'm just watching that on the TV, right? So you've got to work out who these people are and where they're consuming that different information for you to then be in front of them to get to them. Yeah. Otherwise, you're just having a fight with yourself.
Yeah. And what I would do is bring in somebody who knows how to do that, right? Like I don't want to be the only piece of any equation that I'm working within. I just want to focus on what the podcast is doing, you know, like there's TikTok podcast strategists. Okay. It's not me. Let's bring them in. Mm-hmm. Are we trying to reach 21-year-olds for a new like app to find like parties at college? Like, yeah, okay. Well, then LinkedIn's not going to be the place, you know?
And I think that's another really interesting thing about building on what Ryan just said. I employ a designer and I have, as I've said, I love YouTube, and So there are some creators that I would watch that you maybe wouldn't expect. So
Mr. Beast, dude, just tell him Mr. Beast.
Emma Chamberlain's podcast, right? I'm a 40-year-old married man, but I would consume 90% of what Emma Chamberlain puts out. But I only watch her podcast in tic-tac format. I wouldn't go and listen to the whole podcast, but I can tell you everything in the episode from the 6 TikToks I watch. And I have whole conversations with my designer about an episode, even though I've never actually listened to it as a download.
Interesting.
It's dynamic. They're dynamic.
Yeah, that's it's just a quick side question. I was curious, what are one or two of your favorite podcasts for each of you that you guys regularly consume or enjoy?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be. I mean, it's just so basic. I hate saying this, but yeah, Rogan is why I'm here. I had a delusion. Yeah, literally, I just had a delusion of like, I could do this, even though I was like 18, 19. And then I just started it. And then I did it. I mean, I had a local in-person podcast called Bopcast. There's a company called Kids Bop. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but they do covers where kids cover popular songs. They created a podcast called Bopcast. They have 3 million subscribers. So that was my writing on the wall to kind of get out of that. But yeah, there's Rogan, Tim Ferriss.
What do you like about Rogan and Ferriss? Both
long
form.
Yeah, long form. Yeah. I don't know, James, I don't even know if you're like this too, but like, I'm a crazy person. Like, I don't really I never consumed really TV or movies actively at all. You know, I could just have a YouTube account and I'll get ad block and I'm good forever. Like, I'll just watch YouTube forever. I don't need TV. I don't need movies. So that's how I am with podcasts. It's like, I'm either listening to music or I'm listening to these very long, I used to sit and watch a Rogan, like just sit like it was TV. And that's, I don't know. I really don't know what I like about it. I think part of it on an emotional level, which I've never really heard many people talk about this, is like feeling like somebody else is there, like you feeling like you're in the conversation, but you're not in it. But like just having people talking in the background is just like, it makes me feel better when there's nobody like around. So I think that, because I was in a bad spot when I started listening to podcasts and consuming this stuff. And then it helped me get into meditation and mindfulness and read Sam Harris's book and like all of these things. It got me into self-development, you know? So I was in that spot and I didn't really have a lot of people around me. So it was kind of like not to get too in the weeds, but like, it was kind of just like soothing in a sense, you know?
Yeah.
My answer to my podcast consumption is different to that. Very different.
I'll say mine's a little different now. I'll just say than when I started, but yeah.
So if we discount work podcast consumption, so I will listen to specific episodes because people are talking about them, or I will listen to a show for a bit so I've got context to it. I don't count that as listening. It's not fun.
Personal consumption. Yeah.
Personal consumption is very simple. It's completely fluid between YouTube and podcasting. And if you're not making it on both and you don't identify as a YouTuber, I'm not listening. So Impulsive with Logan Paul, the Gary Vee audio experience, Colin and Samir would be my 3 biggest. That makes 98% of my podcast consumption. And maybe there's a UK show called The Rest is Entertainment, which is very UK centric. And it's like the gold standard. I listen to it because it's just the gold standard of how you should do a podcast. And it just makes me happy to listen to how good it is. But that's it. I don't. And if I'm going out on a limb, it's YouTubers making podcast content. And it's nothing outside of that. Because they just know how to tell stories. They care. They're talented. They have business models. They care about their community. Like, I can get on board with it. I don't. So
when you said earlier fluid between YouTube and podcasting, that's what you mean, like people that are on YouTube but making podcasts. And
I watch 80% of my podcast consumption.
Mm-hmm. I'd say I'm about 50-50 now because I don't have the time. and I, unless I'm running or cycling or something, in which case it's potluck what happens. And my TV consumption is very similar to Ryan. I don't really watch movies or any of that stuff. I just YouTube 95% of the time.
And I can't, and I struggle to understand why anyone does it differently. No, I don't really, because
I did. Of you.
Yeah, I still do.
I have a wife, and I watch the odd thing on Netflix, but really, if left to my own devices, just watch YouTube.
Interesting.
Even while driving.
Oh, wow.
I knew it because those hardcore YouTube heads, man, they put that shit up while they're driving.
Yeah, nice. Prop your phone up and
exactly.
Keep
You're
it,
at the red light. You can exactly.
And so the whole YouTube podcast thing, I don't understand why. I understand why it's a debate, but I don't get it.
I guess I do. But here's the reality.
What's the debate? I think I'm missing that. Like, what do you mean YouTube podcasting debate?
The reality of this is that podcasts we're still kind of early in podcasts, which we're 20, 30 years into the radio right now. So like Howard Stern's not on the radio. Rogan is the Howard Stern before Howard Stern. But back to that, podcasts were people kind of on like who were like on radio, then on like Sirius XM, then on Sirius they tried to stop them from saying certain things. Then they created their own web-based interview show on their own like server or website. That was like a podcast now, and audio only, right? And a lot of shock jock type people, right? Now a podcast is like a YouTube video or interview where we also take the audio and put it on Spotify. So the podcast evangelists, the OGs, will be like, that's not a podcast. That's not a podcast for some reason.
Gotcha.
If there's no RSS feed, they think it doesn't count.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So it's just a matter of...
It's an interesting idea, right? Because my production company has historically made money by making audio-only content, where we would put 400-500 cuts into an episode. Like an average episode in my team, they record an hour and a half, and they'll turn that into 34 minutes. Because they just say most of it doesn't need to be in there. I mean, they would destroy this episode. Half of what I say, they would just go, that's not relevant, gone.
On the floor.
On the floor. And then you can't make a video out of it. So it's because there's too many cuts, so it becomes audio only. But we've had to adapt our business model and our editing skill and our services because they want the video. And so what happens in that case is you have to find workarounds, like much tighter scripts to keep them on course, and better training with the talent, and just less tight final product.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the ones you guys have mentioned, at least in the longer form podcasts, are I don't want to say without editing, but they're not as chopped up. I don't think it's more like
like I don't want a narrative podcast. Yeah, you're right. I don't want a like this thing that's like sounds like a TV show where it's like sound effects.
Yeah, it's just more of a long form content, no editing.
Yeah, like I just want people talking.
You don't want anything that we make.
Right. Nope. Curated episode. No.
Yeah. And I got to say, I worked on one podcast that was a celebrity podcast. And I was the guy you have a guy for this, James, but who just goes like remove lighter click here, pan to camera A here instead of B, like all that. Like I didn't even do the content cuts. I was just doing the scene switching, the camera switching, and then the, really minuscule, like there's a camera flashed or, whatever. And I was not miserable because I was working on a celebrity who I really look up to, but like, I was like, this is not me. This is not me at all. It was a fun experience. But yeah, so when you say like there's 300 cuts, like, yeah, I get it now though. I get it. And it's a different thing. And I totally get it. But when you see a lot of these, podcasts, even like YouTube podcasts that look like movie productions, beautiful, like that's what, we have clients still recording on Zoom who have 100,000 downloads. It's just the opposite. But
like I've also worked on big shows. Will Smith's production company, Westbrook, was a client of ours for a while. So, Red Table Talks. Mm-hmm. I've seen Jada Pinkett Smith's podcast, Red Table Talks. I've had insights into that, and I was involved in a podcast that her mother made. We were in the editing of that, and that looks like a conversation that's just naturally flowing, and it's the most planned within an inch of its life. When Will just happens to walk in, he doesn't just happen to walk in. Like everything is planned. Yep. Like that is, they're just ridiculously talented people to make it look natural.
Yeah, if you can do it that way, then it's very nice. But I prefer a much more natural, free flowing conversation. I love long form as well. I hate Joe Rogan, but that's more of a personal thing. I just, he's bombastic and opinionated and giving what I think are wrong opinions to a massive audience, and it's just kind of a lot of times that's just not my thing. But I like more of a Rich Roll or. Even Chris Williamson a little bit now has some good long form.
Proper in the bro club.
That's what I'm thinking.
Bros, man.
I'm not. Yeah, I don't.
No, you're not. But like that is your.
Yeah. I mean, I see that's the culture of
the bro
that,
culture.
Yes.
Yeah. It's not my
Stephen
jam.
Bartlett a little bit gets down.
See, like Williamson,
Go on, you go, Ryan. You go.
No, I was going to say Williamson, Bartlett, Rich Roll. There's just not enough like. Rich kind of has a personality, but I'll say Tim Ferriss doesn't really. Lex Friedman has no personality, and Huberman, not much there. I think that's why I like Rogan, because I'm like, yeah, fucking say it. Like, say what you got to say.
Yeah, he attracts that. He attracts that.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but I'm listening. Exactly. But it also doesn't make sense, because how could I like Tim Ferriss? But like Chris Williamson is just the UK Tim Ferriss. So it's like, how can I not like him? But he's Tim Ferriss with an accent. He's the same person.
Earlier when James was saying about having a scripted episode and that people tune in to listen to the host and not the guest, I am quite the opposite. I listen to the guest. I want to hear what the guest has to say. And when I hear the host interrupting too much, I don't appreciate it as an interviewer. I think an interviewer is eliciting conversation out of the guest, and that's what I want to hear. I want to hear their expertise. I want to hear what they're talking about, different things. So it's just a different audience.
I hear what you're saying, but I can't let that go without saying that's just because that's not actually true. Is the punchline. Right?
Okay.
Because those people that you think you don't want to hear from, like all those bros that just interview other bros about bro stuff, they're very good, and you trust your time with them. So Joe Rogan, Stephen Bartlett, whoever is going to get a great interview. So you might think that you're interested in the guest, but it's the fact that every episode they've got themes that they think you're interested in, and they're controlling that conversation. And there is editorial going on, because I've been on two Rich Roll recordings, for example. Like they are tightly scripted, and they do pre-calls. They know exactly what the answers to the questions are going to be before they happen. Like the whole thing is considered, and there's not left to chance. And so,
sure, and most of the guests have appeared on dozens of episodes. I mean, yes, you know what the topical points are going to be.
So what's actually happening is you're trusting the host with your time, and they're respecting and looking after your time, and they're acting like the voice that you don't have in that situation. So yes, the guests are interesting, but really it's because the host has complete control of what's going on in that process. And when they don't, that's when you just see massive drop-off rates. Like, I've made a ton of podcasts like that. I'm sure Ryan can speak to the same thing. Like,
you mean all of the podcasts that basically I've ever done, which is the retention is zero.
A thing that we look at a lot is a thing. I don't know if you've ever looked at your average completion rate. So if you go to like,
I would probably not leave this business if I did. So no.
So if you look, like, average completion rate is a statistic that I'm a big fan of, which is a counter that conversation that we will have with clients where they're like, well, we only got however many downloads, we're disappointed. And we say, yeah, but your average completion rate was 92%. I can get you 10 times the downloads, but your average completion rate then becomes 8%. What's the point in that?
Yeah. Yeah, man. No, that's so true. I'm just starting to look. I love YouTube's metrics, man. Not all of them are important. I'm not saying that like you should use only metrics. You shouldn't. That's not you're a curator, so you need to curate, not analyze all the time. But yeah, it is very important. I'm starting to angle in this direction, especially working on bigger shows. You have to know the numbers. You have to know what you're working with. You can't just be like, well, people clicked on it and you got a lead, so. Yeah, got to go a little deeper.
It comes down to the beginning of the conversation. You were both speaking a little bit different topics, but I think thematically you're saying the same thing. Like, it really comes down to the goal and the purpose of the content or the show or whatever, and then cascading all from there. And so is it to get clicks? Is it to get leads? Is it just to get vanity metrics? Those kind of things. But
I think we're both big believers in a business model of diversified revenue streams. So make money from advertising, live events, digital products, affiliates. Yeah, like got to do that.
Let's. I want to be mindful of your time. I know we're kind of getting deep into the episode here, but I do want to talk about where you guys see the future of podcasting going, and with AI coming in and just different, all these different channels and platforms. How do you see things? And maybe it's not worth it going too far out in the future, but in the next, in the short term horizon, where do you see things evolving?
I'll take it. AI is going to help. It's going to help the process. Like it's going to help a lot of, which is already helping a lot of creators, right? But these things are not cheap, right? For like an independent business, solo business owner to be spending $300 a month on subscriptions just to edit their podcast, right? So there's a lot, you'll see this. I'll just couch it like this and I'll try not to go off too far on this, but it's like, you'll see a guy, my friend Ruben on LinkedIn, who will be like, hey, this editor creates 10 podcast clips in 14 milliseconds. Okay. How good are the clips? It doesn't matter. People think speed. It's speed and quality are not the same thing. We all know this, right? So that's kind of where I look at it. If you're going to say like, oh, an AI podcast, like a voice generated by AI, that's a podcast that we're going to listen to? No, because we can tell. If you see a face where somebody had plastic surgery, you can tell. It's the same thing for a podcast. You can hear, your brain goes, that's not right. And so until our brain doesn't say that anymore, it's not going to, nobody's going to really listen to it or consume it at scale, in my opinion. So
yeah, that's what I'll say. I'm certainly with you on that. I will counter that with a little bit of, it's hard to speak in generalizations to begin with. I mean, right. And that's what we're doing here. But like, if we just look at text for a moment and stay on LinkedIn, I can easily pick out people that are creating ChatGPT content. I see people that are commenting on my posts that are just using a GPT prompt. It's the same sentence structure, the same 7 words, not exactly, but the same phraseology or whatever. The sad thing is I see those people crushing it on getting followers and scaling their account and it's working. I don't know in the video space. I'm not analyzing, these AI generated podcasts or whatever. I'm assuming that they're getting some market share and they're doing something. So there is unfortunately a feedback loop that is, giving positive feedback to people that are doing that. And I hate it, but I see it happening, and it's only going to get better as we go.
I hear you, and I think this the same thing. And I will always tip my hat to Ryan's commitment to LinkedIn. One of the reasons I don't do that thing is that I'm sure Ryan will speak to this too, but followers and fans are not the same thing. Like,
yes,
like audience and community is not the same thing. You can accumulate all the people you want, but it depends what your goals and motivations are. If you just like to feel loved, I suppose, or feel like an influencer, that's cute. And, congratulations. But, what's the punchline?
Yeah, exactly.
How's it converting? I would just, a couple of things I wanted to say on the future of podcasting as you asked that question. First is, have any of you seen that OpenAI video that's wild with the guy, and then he interacts, he says, he's like giving it a document, and then he says, turn this into a podcast, and then it starts a 2-person AI generated conversation, and then he says, could you put that, he interacts with the podcast in real time and says, oh, could you give that example for my 7-year-old son in terms of basketball? And it can just do it.
I've seen something like that, yeah.
So that's roughly how it goes. It basically, you can give it a document. You say, can you turn this into a podcast episode? And like that, it creates 2 voices and they have a conversation on the topic. And
can you tell the difference though? Like if you were just came across it? Yeah.
I mean,
okay.
But what the capabilities are of what could be possible.
I love it. I hated all of this. Now I'm fully in support of it. Like, I'll tell you what I think is good and what is bad, but it's easy to be a hater. It's easy to see the AI comment on my post and just be like, freaking AI. No, man, I appreciate it. So I'll comment back.
And talking more specifically about the future of podcasts, and I think this is true of all content, is I think all the AI and stuff doesn't really matter. Story beats everything. And we're moving into an era where, like, I don't go on interview shows anymore. You asked me on the show and I said yes, because it's creative. I loved the idea of the concept. And, you know, this is imaginative. These are people who've put more than 2 seconds thought into, like, can I just ask some random people some random things? I don't do those anymore. I think that creative is the variable. And I think that's how it will now get, you know, democratized, because that's what people really want, is a great story, great characters, ongoing narratives, not to, you know, what Ryan's doing in the content he's making in podcast format, by his own admission, is not about the podcast. It's about the opportunity the podcast can create for other things. And I think I've always thought that podcasting has flatlined for 15 years with a small blip during COVID. I don't think it's about to go up or down. I think it will just exist as a medium, a bit like the radio still works, doesn't it? You get in your car and the radio plays. Podcasting will just be like that. And the better you are at storytelling, the better you do. But it's going to become about creative. No one wants to hear an interview with anyone else ever in podcast format. Like, no one cares.
Mic drop.
No, but right? True or not true?
Kind of true.
I'm talking
vaguely true.
Talking in generality.
Hey, me, no, I don't want to watch that. I don't care. See, yeah, I'm with you, and I'll not push back, but like, I do care about the podcast too, James. Like, I really do, and I do spend a lot of time on that. In the strategy, we do that, right? But it comes down to goals, right? And it's some people don't really want to spend all this time creating this whole production thing. Like, they just want to get on and talk, and then when they do, a lot of people listen to it. So it's also the fact that, yeah, there's kind of something for everybody. And that's the beauty of this medium. But yeah, I won't say that podcasts are going to blow up. The problem is, which is the challenge, and the pro and the con, is that they're really hard to make, and they're really hard to become successful. And AI doesn't make it easier to make it successful. AI just makes it easier to edit audio, right? And your audio doesn't determine everything, right? Or this one piece, right? Podcasts are so complex, and that's why I'm pretty much in agreement with you. We could be wrong because we don't know the future, but they're not being creative. People don't have the time. They don't have the time to do it. And me and James sit here all day and do it. And still it's hard, really hard, you know? So it's like, yeah, man, I'm with you. It's not going to it is in a way, it's not easier to get more creative in a world with more distractions constantly. Right. So hence, the more creative you are, the more you're going to stand out. So the more people use AI, the more a human-based creative strategy is going to stand out. So I look at it as a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's enough of an audience out there that I don't know if it'll bifurcate, but it'll definitely segment into different categories, right? There's your long form people that enjoy productions and creativity, and then there's people that just want to spend a microsecond thumbing through and consuming as much content as they can that's entertaining them in a way. But
I definitely don't buy, just because it hasn't really come up, but I don't buy into the attention spans are getting shorter thing.
Me either.
That's nonsense.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Interesting.
Because when I go on TikTok, when I'm supposed to be sleeping at 10 o'clock at night, 8:30, because I'm old, I will watch an hour of TikTok. I might have watched 400 TikToks in that time, but I watched it for an hour. It held my attention for all that time.
Yeah, at a macro level, but at a micro level, you're switching.
Okay, so everything is down to three things. Whether it's podcast, YouTube, TikTok, it makes no difference. It's all content. Ryan alluded to this earlier on when he was talking about his mate who can make you 100 pieces of content in a nanosecond is the title, the thumbnail, and the first 2 seconds. But once you get past that, you've probably got, as long as you tell a good story and you've got good characters and there's a point, people will keep going.
I mean, it's a magazine, right? A magazine is you flip the page, you're on the one page for like 4 seconds. Like all this stuff has been done before. Yeah, maybe they're a little bit shorter, but why is Rogan the biggest and is 3 hours long and super boring and there's no planning and there's no script and like it's 2 random people and like he cuts off everybody and but
they're
why
not
is that
random people? They're personalities, right? So it's just
no. A lot of them are not. Like I think a lot of them are like just kind of like people nobody knows. Like a lot of the time, sure, he has his celebrity interviews, but why is that so successful? Is what I'm saying. Why am I able to sit down for 3 hours and watch it? Like my attention span is getting longer.
And personality aside, the guy is the GOAT. He is number one.
He's a GOAT, man.
In the daily podcast email I get every day, it shows number one in the UK and US, and he's in there every single day.
Sure. He's got it.
Yeah.
Have you guys read the book Amusing Ourselves to Death?
No, it sounds good.
Can't read. What YouTube channel is that on?
Well, it was written
audiobook. I'll do audiobook.
It was either written in the late 70s or early 80s. I don't know. I read it a year or two ago, and it's great.
What's it called?
Amusing Ourselves to Death.
Okay.
And it's basically a chronicalization of attention spans from the 1800s to 1980, let's say. And it just talks about the invention of the telegraph and how that changed the world. And it brought us information from across the world that is totally irrelevant to us, whether, certain things are happening or not, and how the media has created shows. If you think about like people used to go watch debates for 3 hours and very dry, two people talking, debating some topic. And now the news, which was at the time it was TV in 1980, how news segments go down into 60-second segments talking about some worldwide important topic, but then they have to cut it. Okay, and next we're going to talk about the cat that got stuck in the tree in your neighborhood's thing in between this commercial, and just how things have really, this was before the internet, and so now
100-year span
smaller.
Yeah, you're right. 100-year span, no doubt, but TikTok didn't do it, is what I'm saying. Like TikTok,
no, but it's further pulling things down to a 20-second clip or a 40-second clip.
No, it's really interesting. It really is. I mean, we're not going to know until we really see it play out.
It's a great book. Maybe somebody reads it on YouTube. I don't know. You can watch.
I'll get the audio.
Reading.
And this is a whole separate. Thanks for sharing. I'm going to check that out. There's a whole separate debate, and there's loads of stuff you could talk about. You could do a whole hour just on this topic. Like Mr. Beast's videos are more than double the length they were 6 months ago, because he got feedback about character development, and now he's making 30, 40-minute bangers that are doing 100 million views a week.
Yeah, I'm a believer that it's totally about the show and the story. And if you can create a 3-hour story or a movie or whatever and hold somebody's attention span, I think people are there. But yeah, I mean, the majority of what is being produced is these micro content pieces, and that's just kind of the way the world is on reels and shorts and TikToks and different stuff. But yeah, I do. I fully support the fact that because I'll love it. I'm going to go out for a run this afternoon. It'll be 3 or 4 hours. I'll queue up probably 2 podcasts. It'll be a Huberman or a Rich Roll or something that's 2-3 hours long, and it will just engage me while I'm out.
4 hours
How
of
long
running?
Are you going running for?
Yeah, man.
I just said about 4 hours. So it'll
Oh
be
my
about
God,
20 miles out in the mountains.
Oh, well, good luck.
You talk about endurance triathlons. I'm a endurance runner, so I'm running 100 miles in August. So
I'm actually an
training.
endurance eater. I can eat 12 Dunkin' Donuts.
I knew you were into endurance running when you mentioned Rich Roll, because you only know who Rich Roll is if you are ultra
if you
runner.
come from running or sobriety or both. Yeah.
I don't know if we have time for one question, but I have a quick question for you both. If someone is listening to this and they have the creativity and they want to start a podcast, should they outsource their podcast?
Oh no, it's going to take too long.
It's going to take too long.
I mean,
well,
I can
yes or no answer. It's
yes
a yes or no.
No. It depends is my answer, but yes.
Yeah.
I'd say I'll just give them the options real quick, James. Virtual assistant. You tell them what to do. They say, okay, I'll do this, right? That they can edit your podcast. A podcast editor, specialized, an audio person, a video person, a designer. Not as much you telling them what to do. They kind of have their own process. You tell them what they want. Then you have a producer. That's somebody who helps you kind of curate the content. What questions do I include? What do I not? Then you have in-house. So then you can have all of these people under your umbrella of your company. So like those are your kind of your options. And obviously an agency like James or mine is a little bit of pseudo that whole equation. It's better if you do, but it doesn't have to be outside. You can hire somebody in-house who works for you who does it.
Well, we probably ought to put a bow on this one. I know, James, it's getting late for you on a Friday.
I've got you. You're good. I'm not going to do anything else constructive at this hour on a Friday.
Well, I have a call in 13 minutes, so we got to.
Right on. Well, let's finish this up with anybody who is interested to hear more or get in touch with you guys. What's the best way, James?
You can find me on social media at James Bishop IO, and my business is called One Fine Play, which you can find at onefineplay.com.
There you go. LinkedIn's my main platform. Ryan R. Sullivan. If you Google that, you got to have the R because a lot of people have my name, but I'll come up. And podcastprinciples.com. And that's it. If you want to launch a podcast, we have a podcast called The Ryan Sullivan Show. Can't be easier than that.
Right on. Well, thank you both for sharing some wisdom and your time with us today.
Yes.
I know it's a very valuable commodity these days, so we really do appreciate it. And if we can help in any way, please let us know. Otherwise, thanks for coming on the Cashflow Fight Club podcast.
Thank you so much for having us, guys.
Thank you.
For those of you tuning in, we thank you so much for investing your time with us on the Cashflow Fight Club podcast. We certainly had a blast, received some knockout insights, all while learning something new. And we hope you did too.
If you had fun, please subscribe to the podcast wherever you watch or listen.
Lygia and I truly believe the beauty of cash flow is having your money fight for you instead of you having to fight for money. So whether it's one of these methods or something else, we encourage you to dream big and take action. See you next time.